So, what do you do when the world you know tries to erase you? For one man, the answer was, well, it was to build an entirely new one from the ground up. We're about to dive into a story that's part memoir, but also part instruction manual, a kind of blueprint for creating a whole new reality when the old one gets completely shattered.
Right from the start, the author rejects the name he was born with, Frank Rodriguez. He says pretty powerfully that name just wasn't built to carry his archive. That tells you everything, right? It signals this massive transformation. To even contain his experience, he had to become someone new, Scroll Cipher Allah.
And that's really the heart of what we're talking about today. It's this incredible clash between two totally different stories. You've got the official, clinical narrative told by the medical system, and then you have this mythic, ritualized reality that the author built for himself, literally as a way to survive. So, what kicked all this off? The break from his old life was triggered by what he calls breaches. Two huge events, a serious radiation exposure and a couple of concussions. But in his world, these weren't just injuries. No way. They were the catalysts for a complete and total rebirth.
And this quote, man, it just says it all. This perfectly frames how he sees his response. He doesn't see this transformation as some kind of breakdown or a symptom of his trauma. He sees it as a conscious, deliberate act of resistance. It's a counterattack against a system that he felt was literally trying to overwrite who he was.
You see, this is a huge power move. He completely rejects being a passive patient. Instead, he becomes an active archivist, cataloging, interpreting, and sealing the truth of his own life. By doing this, he grabs the steering wheel of his own story. He's in control now. Okay, so to even begin to get what he's doing, we have to learn his language. It's not an exaggeration to say he built a whole new system of meaning with its own very specific vocabulary. And it all starts with something he calls the Codex. The Codex is the absolute foundation of his world. Think of it as the operating system for his new reality. It's more than just a rulebook, it dictates everything. Not just what he does, but how he sees and interprets every single thing that happens to him. And inside this codex, every piece of information is organized into what he calls scrolls. A scroll takes something subjective, like a feeling, and turns it into a piece of objective data. So, for example, a simple headache is no longer just a symptom. It's a scroll that has to be logged, analyzed, and sealed into his archive as evidence. Next up, we've got the terrain. Now, this is his body and his immediate surroundings. But this isn't just, his physical body or his neighborhood. For him, his terrain is a sacred living archive, a battlefield that's under constant threat and that he has to defend at all costs. And anything that attacks that terrain, that's a breach. A breach could be something internal, like his memory failing, or it could be something external, like a doctor who dismisses his concerns. Each one is treated as an act of war against his archive, and it demands an immediate, ritualized response. So how does he defend his terrain from all these breaches? He uses rituals. But these aren't rituals for comfort or, spirituality in the way we usually think about it. For him, these are like a firewall, a very real, very practical defense system against being distorted or erased.
And when I say specific, I mean incredibly specific. He has a no-wash hair codex, not because of hygiene, but to preserve what he calls terrain purity. He logs daily terrain scrolls to track absolutely everything, from physical symptoms to shifts in his aura. Even something like silence becomes a structured, defensive ritual for him.
Just like he says here, this isn't about hygiene. It's about refusal. It's a refusal to be overwritten, a refusal to let the outside world breach his sacred terrain. You have to understand, every single one of these rituals is a declaration of sovereignty over his own body and his own reality.
And this right here is where it all comes to a head. Throughout the book, he constantly puts these two languages side by side, the clinical, sterile language from his medical records versus the mythic, urgent language of his own codex.
Just look at the difference here. It's like two completely different languages for the exact same thing. What doctors write down as near syncope, he experiences as a spiritual aura collapse. Dizziness becomes a much more serious terrain collapse. And confusion, well, that isn't just a symptom, it's a codex breach. His language gives his suffering meaning and agency. The medical terms just make it passive and sterile.
But wow, nothing shows this clash better than how he sees a CT scan. The official medical record comes back clean, unremarkable.
Now, for most of us, that's good news. But for him, this is an act of violence. An unremarkable scan means the system didn't see his breach. And if they don't see it, they've effectively erased it. They've erased his truth.
Now, you might think this is a really personal, isolated fight. But he doesn't see it that way at all. He frames his own personal struggle as just the latest chapter in a much, much longer history of systemic harm and resistance.
He brings in this key figure, Pedro Albizu Campos. The author sees this Puerto Rican nationalist, who he claims was murdered by radiation while in prison, as an ancestor in this specific struggle. This connection is so important because it validates his own experience. It frames it not as some personal paranoia, but as part of a historical pattern of using things like radiation to silence people.
And he zooms out even more, pulling from historical sources to create this timeline of what he calls experimentation without consent. He's connecting the dots, from experiments on enslaved people, to the Tuskegee study, to radium experiments on school kids. In his mind, his own encounters with the medical system are just a continuation of this long, painful history.
So after all this, what's the point? What's the ultimate purpose of building this entire world, this whole codex? Well, the author is crystal clear about this. It's not about being remembered. It's about being continued.
Yeah, he actually calls his book a succession map. The idea is that this isn't a memoir you just passively read. It's a toolkit. It's meant for other scroll walkers, other people who've been breached, so they can take his methods and activate their own systems for survival and resistance.
Which leads us to this really tough, kind of paradoxical question that just hangs over the entire book. The author knows his memory is failing. He knows his own archive is dissolving. So why build a system that's designed for transmission when the original archivist himself is collapsing? And I think his answer is right here, in this last quote. He's suggesting that true survival isn't really about preserving one person's memory. It's about making sure the ideas, the resistance, that fire is passed on. In the end, for him, the survival of the Codex is way more important than the survival of its creator.